good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our virtual seminar this afternoon on book publishing in European Studies, co-organised by the UACES Graduate Forum and Routledge's Contemporary European Studies series. So my name is Niall Robb, and I'm a PhD researcher at Queen's University in Belfast, and I'm the chair of the UACES Graduate Forum. So we have an esteemed panel of European Studies series editors here with us today who have all managed to coordinate one time when we could get everyone together. And we hope to answer as many questions as we can about publishing in European Studies as a PhD or early career researcher in the time that we have. So the format for the session is that we're going to hear from our panel about the focus of their series and their vision for it. And then we're going to ask some questions of the panel, which we've gathered from members of the Graduate Forum and which we'll put to them. So we may also have some time at the end of the session to ask some additional questions. So I'll be monitoring the chat. So please put any questions in the chat and I'll try to ask them in any remaining time that we have. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce first Helena Farrand Carrapico, who is Professor of International Relations and European Politics at Northumbria University, where she is also Jean Monnet Chair and Head of Research and Knowledge Exchange. She is also a co-editor of the UACES Routledge CES book series, and her research focuses on European security, in particular cybersecurity. So Helena will be chairing the questions and answers for the panel and posing the questions. And our panel that we have is as follows. We have first Michelle Egan, who's editor for the Palgrave book series on EU and professor in the School of International Service, American University, and a fellow at the Wilson Center, a think tank in DC, and former chair of UACES. She's currently part of several projects and working on a new book, as well as several articles. We also have José Magone, a professor in regional and global governance in the Berlin School of Economics and Law. He's previously senior lecturer and reader at the University of Hull. He's here representing the Elgar New Horizons in European Politics series. We also have Benjamin Martill. He's a lecturer in politics and international relations at the University of Edinburgh. He's co-editor of the UACES Routledge Contemporary European Studies book series and incoming associate editor of the Review of International Studies. Finally, Dr. Kathryn Simpson is an associate professor in economics and politics of the EU at Keele University in the UK. She is elected secretary and trustee of the Academic Association for Contemporary European Studies, UACES, deputy director of the Manchester Jean Monnet Centre of Excellence, and series editor of the European Politics series published by Manchester University Press. Dr. Simpson has published 2 books, Ireland and the European Union, Economic, Political and Social Crises, which I can recommend, published by Manchester University Press, and Ireland and the European Union, Nationalism and Internationalism, published by Palgrave Macmillan. Her research has also been published in world-leading academic journals, such as the Journal of European Public Policy, Irish Political Studies, and the Journal of Common Market Studies, and she's a regular contributor to academic blogs. So that's the esteemed panel that we have with us today. And I'll now pass over to Helena, who will invite each of our speakers to outline their series and we'll pose some questions.
Thank you so much, Niall, for introducing the event and for introducing the panel. That's very much appreciated. And again, it's a real pleasure to actually be contributing to the Graduate Forum event. So I'd like to turn our attention now to some of the questions that we received in preparation of this event. Questions mainly came from the public, from the group of from the Graduate Forum. And so I would also like to reverse the list of our speakers, and I would like to give the floor directly to Kathryn. So I've read quite a lot of your publications, and I think, I'm a big admirer of some of what you've written. And so I actually thought that you'd be really well placed to answer the first question, which is, what important trends do you identify in the direction of European studies publishing? Are we actually witnessing any significant shifts?
Wow, well, first of all, thank you so much for what an introduction. I feel like an absolute superstar, but thank you so much for such a lovely introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here with you all today. And I'm always I a good friend of the UACES Graduate Forum. So thank you very much for the invitation. I found this question actually very, very tough, trying to kind of establish any of the key or kind of the main key trends. So I'm going to kind of start, I suppose, working my way backwards, talking about some of the trends and really touching upon some of the issues we're seeing around open access. And I think because that's kind of it's probably the most helpful way to do it. So publishing is an ever evolving landscape, and it can be one that can be quite unpredictable at things, I think, to gauge. Not so long ago, it was regarded that it would only be kind of a matter of time, really, before print books would be replaced by just ebooks, solid. And I think that really amplified in particular during COVID-19, and you had a move towards more online resources. And if you think about it in eco-friendly terms, you know, it makes sense. If your trees being cut down, you don't have shipping costs across the world, and you get that electronic information to your, you know, delivered to your door straight away. The thing is, caveat, physical books in academia in particular are still in demand. There's something about us, we like sitting behind a bookshelf and having those kind of hard copy books. But what I think is really interesting with regards to academic publishing is that e-books are always produced as standard now. So any academic publisher that you come across, the normal fight is around the kind of paperback copy. You'll always get a hardback copy. That's normally the hugely expensive £85 plus type book. But the e-version is always there. So I think in terms of academic publishing, that is something that we are quite fortunate about. We don't have to fight for the technological transformation. I think there's probably three trends with regards to the change kind of in the industry in particular. The first one is that confidence in academic publishing remains high, you know, which is a good thing for us, a good thing for researchers. The final kind of golden standard is that you worked so hard on doing this research, you want it published, okay? You want people to read this, and you want the right people to read this as well. The problem is, I think, that publishers are experiencing an awful lot of uncertainty with regards to revenue, and this is a consequence of publishing more digitally, number one, but also around open access revenues. So while physical book sales are, as a consequence, in steep decline, and even as an author, you can see about how many kind of, you know, sample copies you get. My first book, I had kind of 4 or 5. My latest book, I was lucky to get my hands on 2 copies. So it's a change, it's a real change in that area, but you've still always got access to the information. I think that's the first one. The second thing I would say is that academic publishing is conservative. And what I mean by that is change happens very slowly. There's a very well-established way of working. And therefore, kind of the digital transformation is very limited. So I think as an author, and I'm coming at this as a series editor of a book series and the series editor for European Politics from Manchester University Press, and also from my experience of publishing 2 books quite recently with 2 different publishing houses, I think it's really important for the author to create their own look. I don't think you can rely on the marketing departments of the publishing houses anymore. It's very, very different. It's very slow. So again, use your networks, you know, promote that book, whether it's on social media, Twitter, LinkedIn, you know, send an email around your kind of your network, whether that's internally or externally, the institution you're based at, or I say kind of UACES, something like that. I'm also a big advocate of people writing a blog on their research, and I mean this also even if it's a journal article that you've published. So think about places like The Conversation, UACES Ideas on Europe, for example. Take people up on ideas of kind of taking part in a podcast, for example, and talking about your research. Again, UACES is really, really good at this, but there are other networks that do this. And really communicate your research from that point. I think it's really, really important, and to take ownership of it. Don't let all your hard work go to waste. You know, get it out to as wide of audience as you possibly can. And I think the final thing on that kind of first question is the technological divide between books and journals and publishers is wider than ever. I think there's a lot more opportunity now when you're publishing a journal article to be a little bit more innovative. So write a blog for the journal article, for example, or the journal it's being published in. A lot of journals now have a blog beside it. They might do an in conversation with several authors as well. I think journals don't have this perfect, but I think they're being a little bit more innovative than, say, series book editors could be. And I think that's something that you need to think in mind. Very quickly then, kind of going on to my first point, and also maybe linking up to one of the last questions that we were asked, and I'm very happy to talk about this towards the end a little bit more, is around open access and kind of how that shapes a book series or just the kind of general publishing process. There's a lot of pros to publishing open access. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But I think you need to be very careful about the journals you publish in. My rule of thumb when I was a PhD student was that go to the back of your PhD, look at the journals or even the books that you have read and aim for them. That's where you want your research to be. You want to be in, for me, it was European Union politics. I still haven't achieved that, but you get the point, right? European Union politics, JCMS, Journal of European Public Policy, Manchester University Press, Palgrave. Okay, think of the really, really kind of good places. Because I think that's a really good rule of thumb. There's a lot of cons around open access publishing. I think we don't particularly talk about this enough. I don't think we sometimes prepare PhD students and early career researchers coming up to some of the perils of that. And in particular around kind of predatory journals. So these are journals that will target you and say, we'll publish your work in the Journal of Fantastic Research for a fee. I think there's 3 things you need to be very aware of here. Look for journals that are published by reputable publishers. So places like Springer Nature, Elsevier, Wiley, Taylor and Francis. So you know that these journals are legitimate and robust. Also look for journals with reputable editors and editorial board members. So again, drawing upon your network, do you recognize the names? Do you recognize those people? And do you trust those people? The second thing again is look for journals that are indexed in reputable online databases. So things like Web of Science, Scopus, Directory of Open Access Journals, things like this. So again, where you're publishing. And I think the final thing, and we'll probably come back to this a little bit more, is that look for journals that do not require a payment of an APC. Academic publishing charge, until after your manuscript has gone through peer review and it's been formally accepted. Because again, a lot of these predatory journals are saying, right, we can publish your paper now, we'll take your money and we'll go with it. And I think it's really, really important to be aware of some of those issues. Open access is becoming a lot more transparent. I think any decent librarian and subject librarian in your home institutions will be able to advise very well on this. Any kind of director of research within your departments as well will be able to advise your PhD supervisors. But again, draw upon your network and use kind of the external mentors as well to make sure you're publishing in the correct area to do so. I'm going to leave it there because I don't want to talk anymore, but any questions, queries, I am very, very happy to answer, and I will pass back over to Helena.
Thank you so much, Kathryn. That's an excellent, lots of excellent advice here. And I did have a question, which I'm going to leave to the end because I want to make sure that everyone speaks first. But I was wondering also, from a perspective of an editor, what is it that we can actually do to try and actually address this growing divide between the books and the journals that you actually mentioned? So what is it that we can, obviously, we sometimes do, we sometimes actually organize book launches or, try to actually create blogs. So I was thinking, what else can we do as a community of editors working in European studies to actually improve this divide? So, but I'm going to leave it to for the end, because I really want to give the floor to Ben. So Ben, the questions that we actually had for you mainly come from some of the conversations we've had in the past, mainly in terms of actually addressing emerging voices and diverse voices in European studies. So how are current European studies series promoting diverse voices in the field? What emerging new voices do you see in this field?
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much, everyone. It's great to be here, and thanks for the invitation. Great questions, Lena. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to first give a quick overview of the book series, and then I'll say a little bit about the ways I think European studies is becoming more diverse as a discipline, and then talk about the ways that we, as an editorial team, and that includes Lena, of course, went about trying to better represent this diversity. So I'm one of the co-editors of the UACES Routledge Contemporary European Studies book series. I have one of our books here, a very nice hardback by Natalie Tocci. Before she was ghostwriting the EU global strategy, she was working on EU and conflict resolution, and it was our series that published her book, although not while we were editors. The Routledge UACES CES series is now firmly established. It's a relatively broad-ranging journal covering a lot of diverse topics in EU and European politics, and I should say EU studies, actually, because we go beyond politics and are very open to law and sociological and other approaches. It's currently co-edited by myself, by Lena, by Ben Farrand at the University of Newcastle, and Ellie Brooks, who's a colleague of mine at the University of Edinburgh. We've gone for that kind of North East England, South East Scotland vibe for this year. We have 66 titles currently published. A quick scan of those that we've recently published shows just how diverse this series is. We've got work on European security, on media and communications, public opinion, the idea of a European demos, finance and Eurozone politics, the European Parliament, parties, transnational politics. We represent a very relatively broad spectrum of European studies. We're also, as a series, and I wanted to really make this point here because I know we have a lot of early career scholars in the room with us. The previous editorial team made what I think is a very laudable decision to open up the series to PhD students and those who've recently obtained their doctorate alongside established scholars. And I think that was a very good, very meritocratic decision, which really helps the series to be to represent the cutting edge, latest research in European studies. So we're broad in terms of what we represent, but we're also broad in terms of the kind of outputs that we publish. That would be work from early career researchers as well as established professors, monographs and edited volumes. So let me just say a little bit about the ways I think European studies is becoming more diverse, because I think although the series is, in terms of what it's published so far, relatively broad, when we bid for the series, we were also there was also a sense in which we thought the series could do more to represent some of the new kind of voices coming into European studies. And my own view of where this is going is very much influenced by the field that I work in, which is European security and defence. And so for every aspect of European studies, there'll probably be a very different view. But just to give you an example, we know that European studies are a very diverse field because it's defined by an area in as much as it is by institutions. It tends to draw on a variety of different disciplines: politics, law, sociology, languages, history. And yet there's a sense in which European studies has, I think, failed to catch up with parallel disciplines like political theory and international relations when it comes to the incorporation of sort of new fields of scholarship, more critical directions. And some of those that I would give as examples, and it's not exhaustive, is the incorporation of sort of critical theory, gender and LGBTQ politics, queer theory, decolonial and post-colonial research. All of those are now very well established within international relations theory, for example, but less so within European studies, although there are, of course, notable works in recent years that have looked at these. And I think this is a familiar pattern as well. If we go back to, you know, one of the more recent theoretical innovations in European studies was bringing practice theory into EU studies, and again, that's something that followed on about 10 years later after it became established in international relations. So, in a sense, you know, one of the things that we were really hoping to push for with our series is how to better represent some of this new research. And one interesting thing that came out of our discussions is that actually, when you look at the kind of research that's published in EU studies, some of the gaps are quite counterintuitive. So there's certainly a dearth of recent research on post-colonial and decolonial perspectives. We know that European studies needs to do a bit more in this direction. But we were surprised when we looked through the previous titles and previous journals that there's also a gap of kind of inter-institutional relations scholarship. You know, if you go back to the 1990s and early noughties, there was a huge amount of scholarship on this, and we were relatively surprised that that was another gap as well. And so, you know, one of the things that we wanted to do was take diversity very seriously and represent all of those different fields of scholarship that we didn't think had necessarily found their ideal kind of outlets. Which brings me on to the second question, which is how are current European studies series promoting diverse voices in the field? And I guess you'll hear different answers from different people. So I'll just go through and say what we've done or what we're trying to do as a series. You know, this is something we take really seriously, and so we thought long and hard about the ways to go about this. And one of the challenges, of course, is that, you know, we don't have, as editors, it's not a full-time job. We don't have unlimited time. And so we realized very early on that some of the ideas that we thought would be really useful in terms of kind of, you know, one-on-one mentoring was simply very difficult for book series to do. And so we came up with what we think is a pretty good list of alternative ways of reaching out to different bodies of EU studies scholarship. And so that would include making sure that we were represented at a variety of different conferences outside of the traditional roster of EU studies conferences, that when we went to conferences representing the series, we made an effort to go to panels that might be more innovative, represent new directions of research, and represent papers given by junior scholars. We made sure that we created a new and very targeted call for papers, which we sent out to a broad range of disciplines. And so really focusing on targeting those areas of scholarship that I mentioned that we felt were underrepresented. We're in the process of putting together a new advisory board for the series, which again, we want to be very diverse and to represent a number of different aspects of European studies, on the basis that this is also a pool of potential reviewers, and that one of the ways that innovative scholarship can sort of lose out is when the wrong people are allocated to review it. And I'm sure, you know, those of us in the room will remember the struggles in the 1990s within international relations of work on gender being sent to somebody dismissive, and then, you know, even if it was really cutting edge, it was never going to get past you know, the realist stakeholders. And so we're trying to move away from the potential risk of those things as well, and in general just make younger scholars and those representing new fields well aware that our series is somewhere that would be very, very happy to consider their research. So I'll leave it there, and I think, you know, hopefully some interesting questions there about the ways in which editors can engage under conditions of, I think, you know, also not unreasonably sort of limited resources. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ben. And thank you for introducing the series as well. That's excellent, and for telling us a little bit about how you know, the different series are actually trying to incorporate new voices and the efforts that we make to be able to actually listen to those voices and actually make sure that they're heard. So all different strategies are really, really important. Thank you so much for that. And thank you to Kathryn as well, who's already answering the questions on the chat. That's excellent. I was going to ask our next speaker, Michelle, to also address that question, because it's part of the wider questions that she's been asked to address. So if you want to add to what Kathryn has said, that'll be fantastic. So the question for Michelle is, or are, what elements should authors consider when choosing a series to publish in? Because obviously there are a lot of, there are quite a few European study series out there, which don't always do the same. So what are the important elements that authors should consider? And what are the challenges of transforming a PhD into a monograph? And just to restate the question that is in the chat, when you're considering pitching a book proposal to an editor, what sorts of questions should we ask? So should the authors ask? Thank you, Michelle.
Gosh, thank you very much. So I'll start off by saying that I'm part of the Palgrave EU studies, and I cannot agree more with Ben and Kathryn about what they have said. So the first comment is, how do you choose a series? And I want to start off by saying that I'm in a school of 160 faculty. Only 3 of us focus on Europe. So as a result of that, when you choose a series, if your primary audience is to reach to EU study scholars, and that's your target audience, then choose that as a series. But if you're a political economist and you're looking for political economy jobs, we have at Palgrave a political economy series as well. So maybe that is a more suitable series for you. I know we're talking about European studies today, but your target audience about where you see your career, who you're trying to fit and market to and reach might mean that you do go with European studies, but you also might choose others. My colleague, for example, does regional and federal studies, which is well known in the EU, but the regional and federal studies press that she does only actually publishes 3 books or so a year. And so that's kind of small. And does that reach out to a broader, larger audience? So I think those are some of the issues that you might consider. Who are you trying to reach? If it's European studies, the EU, then these are the presses that you might think about. So I say that as sort of the initial caveat. We're also expanding and very interested in a variety of perspectives and a variety of authors. I have thought for a long time that European studies has very much attracted a lot more political science, IR, without sort of tapping into legal historians who do great work, sociologists, economists, and, you know, even lawyers. And lawyers tend to always go, to my disappointment, to Edgar, Elgar, or Hart Press. And yet they do a lot of work that is at the cross-section of law and politics. So like everybody else, I would like to see diverse voices in the discipline. And as somebody who comes, I'm teaching a class from empire to post-Brexit. So the post-colonial is very front and center to what I'm thinking about. So I do think we need to think about diverse voices, but that also means diverse voices, not just in who we're publishing, but also in terms of who we're asking as reviewers. And I will say this quite frankly, that one of my colleagues has published in a number of the journals that Kathryn mentioned and has never been asked to review by them. And she's a more global South scholar. So I think there is sometimes an implicit bias in how we do that. And so I'm very conscious of that. I'm also very conscious when I'm sent an edited volume. Does it have a mixture of junior and senior scholars? Does it have new voices? Does it have people who really can put the time in to do the editorial work and bring coherence to an edited volume? And then finally, I think I don't want to see an edited volume that's just from people from the same institution. It feels like a group of friends got together, they had a conference, and they want to do an edited volume. And I put that out there as just a comment. So in terms of in terms of thinking about a dissertation, and in response to the question by Natalie at the at the beginning, I would say look at the book proposals that are online. They're a good guidance to how you put together a book proposal. The second thing is send us an email to meet the editorial team at a conference. Yes, we do. I will be at USA. My colleague Collier will be at UACES. And Amber, the commissioning editor, is often at BISA and PSA. So we try and, really reach out to you. And we often have coffee with prospective authors at conferences. And the other thing that I do is, just like Ben, I go to interesting panels, particularly not in my field or area. So then I can see what people are actually doing. And then I sometimes will approach you at the end of a panel. So don't forget that we may be sitting in the audience and be interested in your new work. Let me just say a couple of things about the last question, which was dissertation, which you spend a lot of time on. And I just want to send a comment in. We want innovative book projects and proposals, but I would counsel people about sending an unrevised dissertation. And we get a lot of these requests. And I think you should put your dissertation down for a couple of months, reflect on it, think about the feedback you got at your dissertation defense, circulate revised chapters to your colleagues, your friends, use a departmental seminar to get feedback on a chapter. And I would say to you, as somebody who has done this now 12 years, cut, edit, revise, cut, edit, revise. And I say that because oftentimes a dissertation, particularly in political science, tends to have a standard format. Chapter 1 or 2 is always methodology and lit review. And it's usually very, very, very long. And so I would say cut, edit, devise, revise. Is all of that literature review and methodology necessary? Can it be an appendix? And then second point that I would say to you, articles came up. The question to ask yourself, if I publish a lot of articles from my dissertation, what is new for a book publisher? We have to sell a book as well. So if you've published most of it as articles, we're going to ask you what is new and what is left. That doesn't mean to say you can't do a combination of both, but if you've published most of it as articles, what is the value added from a publisher perspective of publishing as a book? Finally, a couple of other comments. Is your data up to date? You're doing the dissertation, you're the person in the field, but if you spent 2-3 years writing it, and then there's a year to publication and production, is your data, is your analysis up to date? And then a couple of other comments, multiple submissions to presses. For early career researchers, we don't like you necessarily unless you tell us that you're submitting to multiple presses. Why? First of all, we pay reviewers. And so we're paying out for review. So if you send it out to 3-4 presses, we would like to know, because we may be asking the same reviewer. And it also is my time and Ben's time and José's time and Kathryn's as editors. So we need to know. Secondly, in our press, as an editor, I give you feedback, or one of the reviewers as well, on the book proposal and the book project, as well as the external reviewer. So if I find that I've done all this work for you and then you take it to somebody else's press, I spent time in terms of effort. And so And so for a early career researcher, we want your CV, we want the book proposal, maybe some sample chapters. You can also propose reviewers, providing they're not your dissertation committee. If you think there's people in your area, you're also doing us a service if you propose potential reviewers. And then finally, the last couple of things, I would say, when you get a review, breathe. When you get a review, drink a glass of wine. You may not like the reviews. You may not disagree. This is your baby, and somebody is critiquing it. And so I would say to you, take your time in crafting a response to the reviewers. In my mind, this is one of the most important things you can do. You don't have to agree with everything, but you do have to respond. Don't just dash it off. Don't give me a manuscript a month later. Take your time, because because you want a good manuscript, you want good reviews, and you want it to get accepted. And so I do a final clearance review, or one of my editors does. And so I want to make sure you've answered the reviews, you've taken some of them on board, and that you have responded to the feedback. I'm not saying you have to accept all of it. I'm just saying you have to engage. So I will do a final clearance review. Imagine that I'm doing hundreds and hundreds of pages of reading, and I have to look at the reviews, and I have to look at your revisions as well. So it's my time to get that book into publication mode as well. And so if you want to know, I'm just reading, Ben mentioned one book. I'm just published Bridget Laffan and Stefan Teller's book on Brexit and EU responses. If you want a model, I think I only wrote 2 comments on the entire clearance manuscript. That's unheard of for me. So use it as a model and take seriously not just the book proposal, but also take seriously the response to the reviewers. That's probably the most critical point between acceptance and contract. Thank you.
Fantastic, Michelle. Thank you very much. Lots of excellent points here. And I have to say that as an editor, it is really tricky when you've gone through an entire process, you've reviewed the proposal, you've provided comments, you sent it out for review, peer review has come back, the editor, the author has been asked to engage, and then the book comes back and just the engagement simply isn't there, and you're thinking, you feel like you're sinking and think, what now? And then you have to restart the process, and you have to ask the author to re-engage, and it's for us, it's really it's an enormous amount of work that goes into this, and so we really appreciate. I think nothing makes me happier when even if the author says, I don't agree with this, but I will still engage and respond. It's actually a great dialogue. So I really, really support that point. Another thing that came up among the things that you mentioned is that something I've been thinking for a long time is that maybe as editors, we should actually be thinking of creating targeted training for PhD students to transform their dissertations into books. Actually, this could be something that would be quite a value. And I'm saying this in the context of UACES, of the graduate forum in particular. Niall, write that down. And in terms of something else that is quite important is, depending on where you are, obviously, the job market will look different and will probably prioritize different things. If you happen to be in the UK, then you probably have to think about the ref strategy in terms of, what does the ref prefer? Does it prefer a bunch of articles, or does it prefer a monograph? In the unit of assessment I'm part of, the strategy seems to be very clear. Now we're going directly for monographs. We're definitely prioritizing monographs over articles. And so you always have to keep that in mind as well while making your plans. But thank you so much for that. That was excellent. And then last but not least, obviously, then I'd like to actually give the floor to José. And the questions we have for José are, what is the realistic timeframe for developing a book from idea to reality? What is the proposal submission process like? And how long does peer review typically take? And what support, you have a lot of questions, sorry. What support would be available from the editors? And what support does the publisher offer for dissemination post-publication?
Helena, thank you very much for inviting me, and also UACES. I love UACES. Although I'm not a member, I have to renew my membership. Because I have also PSA membership, so it's. But I have to renew now the membership again after this meeting. And thank you also for spelling my name the right way, because I'm Portuguese, José, European studies. Yeah? So it's important. I am editor of a series by Edward and Elgar. This is a very small publisher, but a very ambitious and very serious publisher. And one thing that we have about this is that they have to fight a lot against other publishers that are much bigger, like Routledge or universities press and all these different presses and so on. So they do lots of efforts to get good books so that they can sell it then afterwards. So that's one aspect here. The series, it's called New Horizons in European Politics, and we have about now 18 books that we published in this series. Among the books that we publish, after Benjamin showing off his books, I have also to show you. So one is Europe, China, and the Limits of Normative Power, if you see here. And this is a PhD. This is one of the first books I was able to edit and to then take a recommendation, give a recommendation. And it's a book that had to be changed considerably because it was a PhD book, and so a PhD dissertation. And when you do a PhD, you are a bit solipsistic. Why did I choose the word? Solipsistic. So basically you think, oh, I am the greatest, blah, blah, blah. It's typical. I mean, all saying, I am doing the book of the world. And so now, basically you have, when you publish, you have to think, I am one among many, and I am writing for more than myself. So I have to write a book that people understand, and it's academic enough, but it's also for a broader audience, particularly policymakers that are specialized in certain policy areas and so on. Because, I mean, I'm seeing the numbers that I sell in my books, and they are not many. I mean, the best books that I sell, maybe I sold about 1,000, but this is really the best I could. Normally, you sell it 50 to 100, 150 books for a monograph. So it's not very much to sell. So the publishers are interested to have books where they can still sell and make money, because it's very expensive also to do a book. And this is one aspect that's very important. So in terms of the time frame, I myself, from my experience, when I was at the beginning of my career, some 30 years ago, I was desperate to publish. And so I didn't think about the time frames and anything. I would just send the proposal, and then they will send it back. And it was a bad proposal. And because I'm not native speaker, I would even send it in my English, and they would just send it back and so on. So I think one thing that you have to think about is that it's a serious thing. Somebody will invest in your book. So it means that take time to do the book proposal. And basically this will take then, if you are successful, you have to think about at least 1.5 years until publication. because the process is copy editing, and they have to go to the production and put it in so that it's printed and so on. So it takes time, and you have to do a cover for it and so on. So it takes time until it's published. So I would, as a realistic, comfortable time frame, 2 years to organize everything from the submission or writing the submission to publication. So 2 years, think about it like that and so on. If you do it faster, if you have time and do faster, okay, that's great, it's no problem. But don't rush to submit it, because then you have many mistakes in there, and in the end they will say this guy is not, we cannot trust really this kind of, because it's doing everything in a rush and so on. So publishers want really lots of information about your book, so that they can invest in it. So it's a very important aspect. So submission of proposal plus sample chapters is a good idea. So 1 or 2 sample chapters, even if it's your PhD, the concrete PhD chapters, is not a problem. You can still transform these chapters. You'll get it from the reviewers, some opinion on that. But it's good to see that's already done. There is a PhD. There is something you can work on. Because the more security the publisher has, the better it is also for you. So in this sense, so I think it's one aspect that you have to think is really to give as much information as possible. And I have here basically from our website here. I have to go to my website here. Somewhere here, do Elgar here. It's Alex's now. Okay. So submission of a proposal, we have it here. So basically, all publishers have in the website a kind of a form where you can submit a proposal. And I have here, for example, one which is proposal research monographs. And I'll open it, and you can see the kind of questions that they have here. So I have just to make it a bit too many. So here,
we can see it. Don't worry, it's fine.
I think I need to click again on this word because it. So you have here lots of questions. If you see, I will not go through it, but just to show you really how it looks like. This is really a very good formulated form, because you have all the name, present position, you explain the book, description, table of contents in full. It's here. I will send this. It's on the website, but I'll send this then to UACES. Target extent, basically, and so on. Copyright figures and tables. So make sure that everything that you do, that you have already the rights, copyrights. So the best thing you do yourself, your tables and figures and everything, not to copy and paste. So that's not a very good strategy. The timing. So you explain how much time, but be realistic, because if you are working at the same time as a lecturer or doing other things, you don't have so much time. I mean, it's so be realistic. If you have the whole time, okay, that's a different thing. Then the market. It's very important to say, how does your book fare in relation to other books? Because there's so many books and so on. So they want you to know if you are producing something new, something that can be new for academia and so on, competing titles. And the international market with Google books, you can get lots of books that are in the international market and check there and so on. So the price that you aim, of course, this is forget it, will be very high, the price. And then the referees, you put names of referees, as Michelle was saying already. If it has a research grant, for example, if you had a grant from one of the major funders and so on, public funders, it's good for you. It gives you an edge, somebody and so on. And sometimes they have also money to publish. So that's a proposal submission when you want to submit it and so on. So it's already a very kind of sorrow kind of list of things that you should respond. And also Elgar, that's something else, has here gave me for this basically it's something else. Yeah, wait a minute. It's a blurb that I have to do at the end. I think it's this one. Yeah. So many words here. And in this one, if you go up, what are things that you should think about a PhD? So this is done by Edgar Welger. So you should keep your audience in mind and write for the widest potential readership, not necessarily only for those working on similar research. Do not assume all of your readers will be as familiar with the literature as you are. So be ambitious and aim to write the book you want really to write. Then the style. You should tell a story. It should be a story. So the narrative has to flow, a story, a thriller in some way, but a boring thriller, academic, but a kind of story that you should tell, because in the end it's a book, and you have to enthuse the audience from the first chapter to the last chapter. So it's an important thing to make it really interesting, the writing, the prose. Another thing that they say is it's very dangerous to say that's a thesis, a PhD. Why? Because then you are classified as a dissertation, and this is at the lower level in terms of library books and so on, so to sell it. So they now tell me, don't write anything about seminars, about PhD and so on and so on, which is a pity because there is a story to it. But this is what Edward Elgar wants to avoid, really, that then nobody in the libraries buy it because it's just a PhD. Opening chapter should be a very good chapter, the opening chapter. So very simple, not just putting working hypotheses, 1,000 working hypotheses and things like that. No, research questions, and if possible, it should flow. Literature review should be cut down to the most important aspects. The methodology, which is a very important aspect in the PhD, has to be sized down. It has to be smaller because it's too much. Sometimes it's very good. It's a very important chapter, but maybe for the readership, it's not so interesting. Also, the notes and references. You should have it, the footnotes, but don't exaggerate. No, it's an important aspect there. A copyright. Review before submission. It's important that you have a friend. I'm not a native speaker. I'm a Portuguese, and I was a long time in the UK, and it took a long time for me to realize that I have to ask other people to help me to look at my English, because even if I have the best English, it's still not native speaker status. So basically, I send always my book to a language editor before I submit the book, and it looks much better because expressions and things like that. For a poor PhD student, I think a good thing would be to have a nice friend that would look at it for free and somebody that's has a very good knowledge of English and can help you. Because then this enhances the chances of being accepted because it's in a better English and so on. So, and then another is exclusivity, meaning that it should not be published elsewhere. I am old school. I never published before. So when I had my PhD, I was avoiding always to publish things before being graduating. I was afraid that this could be then a reason for not accepting my PhD. But today it's so crazy, so nobody cares about it anymore. But at that time it was this big fear that I'm giving information, and then in the end they say, oh, but you published already there, so we cannot give you the PhD. So this is something that I wanted to show you here about the things that you should think about the PhD.
Thank you so much. We're also 5 minutes away from concluding the session, so I think I'm very sorry for interrupting you. I don't know if you had any other points.
Just one point here that I want just to respond here. Peer review. It takes about 1 month, maximum 2 months if people are very busy. But peer review, if done rightly, if these guys have time, it's super for you. Even if you are rejected, you get this information and you learn, you can improve your manuscript. So I think peer review is very important. And the last point is the editors, all publishers that I had were very friendly, very nice, and they help you. So they explain the reasons, they are very transparent. Thank you very much, Helena.
Thank you very much, José. And so I'm very mindful of time, and I know that some of the colleagues present here have other appointments and actually classes to teach right after. So I just want to actually bring the discussion to a close. We had, and thank obviously, first of all, Michelle and Kathryn for actually answering a lot of the questions here. We did have one question that remained unanswered. I might actually in 1 minute try to address this one, which is the question by Czeslava. What is your policy towards Russian authors, and what is even more important, what is your policy towards Russians in the editorial board? So just to mention that obviously this will vary from publisher house to publisher house, but the point being that I can speak on behalf of my own institution, my own publisher. There is no policy towards Russian nationals. In the sense that we welcome any Russian national as an author. There is a policy, probably, and this will vary from institution to institution, has to do with where those Russian nationals are in terms of which institution they're attached to. So that is what the main issue might be, in the sense that the publishing house, depending on what it is, might feel less comfortable actually giving a platform to a specific Russian institutions, depending which ones they are. So that I'm not able to say because it varies widely. But just to mention that we have a lot of nationals who actually come from, who are Russian nationals. They work in UK, they work in a lot of different institutions, and that doesn't reflect at all on Moscow's policy. So in a way, there is absolutely no policy in relation to Russian nationals. We are 2 minutes away from concluding, so I just want to say thank you so much for the entirety of the panel, for all the questions, and for giving you time to actually contribute to this discussion. I hope we'll have future discussions, and I will actually just give the floor to Niall to wrap up the event.
Indeed, thank you very much to everyone on the panel for their thoughts. Of course, we didn't manage to get to a question and answer session, because we had so much to get through in the bulk of the conversation. But I'm really grateful to Michelle and to Kathryn for answering questions in the chat as we went along as well. And just on behalf of the UACES Graduate Forum, say thank you to everyone for coming, to everyone for being on the panel, and to call the session to a close. Thank you.